Valve Company. So thanks very much for being here with us today. And Leah, I'm going to turn over to you.
Awesome. Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's session of Quick Connections. Super excited about this week because for me, this is like a great education. I've been in this industry a long time, and I still get confused about what is the difference between Buy America, Buy American, what does it all mean, and what should I do about it? So thanks, Rick and Koltin, for being here, and let's jump in. So Koltin, let's start with you. So can you tell us and explain the difference between Buy American and Buy America?
Yeah, so first off, I did throw in the chat side a link to our webpage that has a detailed document that goes into a lot more explanation on it. So when there's questions, because there will always be more questions on this, you can take a look at that. But the big difference is Buy America is really beholden to the Department of Transportation. So it's more tied to infrastructure projects. It requires 100% domestic, really melted and manufactured product. 65 to 70% of the cost of the product needs to come from the United States, versus Buy American, which is a lot of government grant projects, Department of Defense, Department of Education, and the Federal Aviation Authority. And that one has a domestic component, which would be 52225-9, which is going to require domestic products, but it's only 51% or a substantial transformation in the United States. Or it also allows for friendly countries. So 52225-11 allows for you to use material that comes from Western Europe, from South Korea, Taiwan, areas of that nature.
Okay, so and the friendly country thing, does that list ever change? Countries get taken off?
Yes, so it does get updated. It's important when you get a contract to take a look at what the year that is called out. We posted a list on the webpage, as I said in the chat box, of the current list. For example, the latest country that was added was Ukraine. When Russia invaded Ukraine, they made the decision to add Ukraine onto the list a couple of years ago. It was not previously there. So countries do get added, they do get removed, but it is usually locked in for a couple of years at a time.
Okay. Rick, so in what types of contracts or industries will we typically see these types of contract clauses?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me in, Koltin and Leah. Typically, you'd see these statutes used when there's federal or state money involved, as in schools or hospitals or airports. If the government increases spending or financing of projects, there will likely be an increase. But as far as it relates to COVID, I don't really think there's a big uptick or downtick as a result of COVID itself. At least I don't see that.
Okay, thanks. So you don't think there's going to be a change in this, I guess, as far as the impact of COVID and everything?
I don't think so. I think the change, if it comes, is more a result of things that are happening with the desire by at least the current administration to want to be more American made. That's where I can see that. I don't think it's really so much COVID, but as the desire to want to bring things back to the United States, which is a good thing.
Ah, that makes sense. So Koltin, so what type, I'm not sure which way to ask this question. So it's either what types of products are typically purchased, right, that meet these requirements, or is it the reverse, where what types of products don't meet these requirements?
So both, I mean, are valid questions.
Okay.
When you're talking about Buy American Act, which only is 51% or substantial transformation, really any product that is purchased can usually meet those requirements. It's very easy to meet as long as it's called out at the beginning of a contract. It's pretty easy to meet that one. When you're talking about Buy America, which requires really melted and manufactured in the United States, that's when it gets more complicated. Things like castings in certain materials, so when you get to cast steel valves or cast products, there is very little availability in the United States, and those are ones that a lot of times we cannot find in certain products, product ranges, and Rick can probably speak to that a little bit as well, of what is and isn't available. But that's a lot of times where we'll need to work with somebody to request a waiver around the requirements for Buy America on certain cast products.
Okay, so while we're on that topic, I'm just going to flow into the next question I was going to ask you, right, about how do you get around those clauses and obtain waivers, and what do you need to do to be able to qualify to get that waiver?
Yeah, so a lot of times what we do is we'll put a letter together that's just a certificate of compliance stating that what they're looking for is not available, and so this is what is available. So a lot of times we can meet Buy American with the casting, not necessarily Buy America with, say, a Mexican cast product instead of a USA cast product. But we'll put that together and provide that they can then submit for the waiver. What we've also seen is that a lot of times if they're building something with the material that we're providing, say a boat ferry for Department of Transportation, that ferry has a 70% requirement for domestic melted and manufactured. So if they look at the item and say, this is only a $200 item that's going into a $50 million boat, it's okay if it doesn't meet the requirements. And so internally on the accounting side, they can look at that and decide if they really need to meet it on 100% of the items.
Okay, so, but I guess requesting the waiver, is it a simple request, or do you have to prove that you've kind of done your due diligence and kind of made the effort to purchase those types of products?
We have never had one of our letters of compliance questioned, so I don't believe that it's overly complicated with a letter from a supplier stating the requirements on there.
Okay. Rick, so is there a difference between large and small contracts when it comes to being in compliance? As far as, is it harder, is it easier, is it the same?
I would say generally there's probably more pressure on the smaller contracts because you can, the bigger the job gets, the more is at risk. If you can't get these types of products, that's more likely where you'd be able to see a waiver. So I would say that the smaller jobs would be more difficult or to get away from, and the bigger jobs, you probably have a better chance of finding an exception if you need it. But overall, the products are going to be the same. It's not changing what's available in the marketplace.
Okay.
And just to add on to that really quickly, Leah, the smaller projects, depending on the size of the government funding and grant that's going into that project, will have a 100% domestic requirement in there. So it'll be the 52225-9 versus the larger projects, if they go over a certain threshold of government spending, automatically jump to the 225-11 and allow for friendly countries, just because the federal government knows that that can substantially bring down the cost of a project. And so as the project gets larger, they don't want to artificially balloon the cost of construction by requiring 100% domestic.
Okay, that makes sense. So I'm going to ask this next question of both of you because after our conversation last week, I have a feeling you guys are going to answer it differently. Rick, I'm going to start with you. So since COVID-19, what impacts are you seeing as far as availability of Buy America or Buy American products?
So when China shut down, that had an impact initially. It happened right during their typical annual spring festival time, and that was about 10 days, and then there was 3 more weeks added in. So we were preparing, as we always do every year, for the normal shutdown. But when this hit, we were shut down for 3 additional weeks. And some companies were shut down for even longer periods of time if they were in provinces that were locked down or they had employees with COVID cases. We were very fortunate. We had no employees with COVID cases. So since our March operations, we've been back to full strength. 100% of our employees are back. We are shipping back at normal rates starting in March. So we really didn't lose a beat as a company. We were fortunate to be in that position. In the US, what we've seen is a slowdown in the amount of business, incoming orders. I think some of it relates to projects obviously being slowed down. Some of it relates to distribution probably cutting back their stock when they see the volume coming down. So we're getting sort of a double whammy of that. April was the worst. May was a little better, and we just finished June, and it was also a little better than May. So we're feeling like it's starting to come back a little bit.
Okay, great. Koltin, how would you answer that same question?
Availability of products has been interesting. We thought that there would be more disruption than there actually was. I think a lot of that was due to the decrease in demand that came with the price of oil getting dramatically cut and seeing the oil patch really dry up in terms of taking supply out of the market of certain items. But what we have seen, especially on the domestic side, is issues where manufacturers are going from what was 3 shifts down to, say, 1 shift as they slow down their production. So we're still able to get items. My only concern would be is if for some reason there was a large run on demand that the market really didn't see coming and it took them a couple weeks to get ramped back up, that would be the only time, but it would be short-term supply disruptions. We don't see any major supply disruptions coming.
Okay. So while I have you on the hook here, I'll ask you the next question. So, we talked about availability. What about pricing? Are you seeing any pricing impacts, and do you expect that to change in the coming months?
Yes. So we have seen price come down, especially on carbon steel items, for example, came way down. A lot of that was due to a lack of demand and a flood of inventory on the market. Stainless as well. One of the things that's really interesting that we've seen is domestic stainless steel welded pipe is actually less expensive than import stainless steel welded pipe. That material does meet NSF 61 that's being produced in the United States. And so we're starting to see some instances where domestic is coming down as they try to compete to gain market share again with the import material. Things like copper as well came down dramatically due to a lack of demand, but they are going to go back up. And we're already seeing it on the copper side. As soon as worldwide, you start to see investments in infrastructure. So you're seeing China and Europe start to invest money in infrastructure projects. The United States probably won't be far behind. The price of copper has bounced off of that bottom and is moving its way back up because of global demand. All
right, cool. Rick, I know you already touched on this a little bit, but can we dive a little bit deeper into this? So in talking about China, there's been a lot of assumptions, I think, in regard to availability of products and impacts to what we can get. Can you address this a little bit further?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, we did lose 3 full weeks of production that we had planned on initially. But we just, from a China operation, we're in a fortunate position because we own the operations and we're building products from other components. So we buy components in China, we don't buy finished goods. And so we're in better control. We have not seen our supply base in China be unduly impacted. There was some slowdown initially, but now they're all back up and running. We haven't had anyone fall out as a result or extend their lead times beyond a position that would make it more difficult for us. So we've really fared well and don't feel like it's been an issue. It doesn't mean it couldn't rise back up again, but I think it doesn't look like that's going to be the case at this point in time.
Do you guys think that you're in a unique position, or do you think if I ask this question to other manufacturers and suppliers, we would get that same answer?
I don't think you'd get the exact same answer, because if you're dependent on the company who's also supplying parts to other people, they have demand and supply potential issues, and they could be, like I said earlier, in a province that had a more extensive shutdown, or they could have employees that were on lockdown for longer periods of time. The one thing about China, they were very detailed. All of our employees had to log in every day on a cell phone with an app that told what their temperature was, where they were at in the country every day. They weren't allowed to leave certain areas because they were all on holiday. So we were just fortunate, I'd say, that when we first started up, we were at about 85%. After about 2 weeks, we were over 90%. And by the end of the first month back, we were at 100%. Some employers, were locked down in the 50% range for quite a while, depending on where they were. Closer to Wuhan, the more difficult it was.
Okay. So I guess your advice there is, ask some good questions and find out where your products are coming from.
Talk to your distributors and the manufacturers that they represent. Talk to the manufacturers like us directly to understand what's going on. We spent a lot of time, money, and energy to build that infrastructure there. And we feel things as they happen immediately, but as a result, we're also able to react to them differently than companies who are relying on somebody else to give them the entire product.
Okay, great.
And to piggyback on that just
yeah,
a bit. So we thought there was going to be a lot more supply disruptions, mainly out of Italy and out of China, were the two hardest hit countries. And so we actually brought in a lot of inventory, expecting there to be more supply disruptions than there ended up being. And I think that because demand dropped off at the same time that you saw the supply disruptions, you didn't end up in a situation where you couldn't get materials. And as demand is slowly ramping back up at the same time that supply is slowly ramping back up, it seems to have moved in a way that isn't leading to any shortages of items on the ground.
Okay, that makes sense. So along that line, Koltin, so what advice would you give to our contractors in regard to any Buy America or Buy American requirements that they're anticipating in their contracts?
Communication is 100% the most important. If we know at the beginning of a job, if any of your suppliers know at the beginning of a job that there are Buy America or Buy American requirements, it's really easy to meet those requirements, or at least communicate any difficulties that are going to be had. A lot of times, unfortunately, we see these requirements get flowed down either after the quotation stage or even sometimes after materials already shipped, when somebody needs paperwork certifying the material met the Buy America or Buy American clauses. A lot of times we can track the country of origin of items that were supplied. That's not the issue, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be in compliance if we didn't know about it up front. So pre-construction meetings with your suppliers are key. Any questions that you have in terms of the contract and the requirements that are in there, make sure to talk those out with your customer as well as your suppliers to make sure that everybody understands and is interpreting the requirements the same way. Because if you call out Buy America, while there is a very clear definition of Buy America, certain people have different stigmas and different interpretations of it. So making sure that everybody's on the same page at the beginning of the job is really important.
Okay, great. Rick, how have recent tariffs impacted any of your products, any Buy American requirements that you've seen?
So tariffs, a year ago, I would have probably answered this a little differently when they first hit, and we had no idea what was happening. I was under the firm belief that they'd be gone in 3 months. Clearly, I was 100% wrong. I tell you right now, I think they might be here to stay, and I'll probably be 100% wrong on that too. But and the good news is that we're a year later plus now, and they have been digested through the marketplace. We've all adjusted from the manufacturer to the distributor to the contractor, and they become part of our normal, everyday, ugly part of life, which has increased the cost of doing some work. At the same time, you know, the current markets were super strong to start this year. The first 3 months of the year, at least from our perspective, was well up over prior year. So we were coming in, even with the tariffs in play, into a very strong, robust market, and then all this stuff hit, and that's what's really hurting us now, not so much the tariffs.
Okay. Koltin, this one is for you, and I need some education on this one. So, okay, am I correct in understanding that to qualify as Buy America or Buy American, a product has to comply with either substantial transformation or the 51% content rule? And can you explain what that is and maybe give me a couple examples?
Yeah, so Buy America is going to require 70% melted and manufactured in the United States. So that we're going to pull that one out of this conversation. Buy American, which has the domestic or the friendly country aspect to it, allows for 51% of the cost or substantial transformation. And substantial transformation would be taking an item and changing its intended use. So if you took, in Rick's world, we'll stick with valves. If you took a bunch of components of a valve that were bought from China or another country, brought them into the United States or South Korea or somewhere else, and assembled and tested that valve, that would be substantial transformation. You're taking components and turning them into a final product that has a different use than those components had. And so the country of origin for those items switches from China to the United States or South Korea or somewhere else. And therefore it would meet the requirements of Buy American.
Okay, I think it makes sense, clear as mud. So, but I will, so the link that you put in the chat box though, is all of that kind of information there for reading
Yeah, it
pleasure?
is. Substantial transformation isn't covered in as much detail, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
More questions that people have on it, but the real thing to know is that country of origin is what's requirement for Buy American according to commerce law, and commerce law allows for substantial transformation. And so taking plate and rolling it into pipe, for example, bringing in blanks of items is a little bit questionable. The blanks need to be very, very unfinished and really just a raw forging that has zero machining done to it or zero shape. You can't just bring in rough fitting and bevel the edges and then say that it's substantial transformation. Their water was going to flow through that the exact same way before you brought it in. As it does, it's just a little bit more finished now. And so you're really finishing your project instead of substantially transforming that product.
Got it. All right. I feel so much smarter now, at least until tomorrow.
It'll change by then. So.
All right, Rick. So how do we verify that a product meets the Buy American requirements? Are they marked? Are they marked as such, the actual product, the containers? So how do we know?
Well, first, the distributors and the contractors are relying on the manufacturers to properly label their products. That's one of the things you're relying on. So it's important to know who you're dealing with, how they operate. The laws are fairly clear. I mean, Koltin's making it sound pretty clear. Once you understand all those statutes, I guess it becomes clear. But not every properly labeled product meets every statute that we're talking about because these statutes are vary. The Buy American, as he said, makes it with substantial transformation, and what he described is what we do. We have products that we make in China, bring in as finished goods, labeled made in China, and those do not meet the Buy American. But we bring those same components in, we put them through our assembly process and our test procedures, which are complex, and they do substantially transform because the components by themselves will not meet your customer's requirements, our customer's requirements, and they do once we're done. And the detailed assembly and processes, are the key to that. So I would say, are they marked as such? They should be. We label them assembled and tested in the US, and it doesn't say made in China. That should be the key. But you got to be clear that the guy you're dealing with is doing exactly what it says he's doing.
And a lot of times, Leah, the MTR or the document package that goes along with an item is really important, because what we've seen a lot of times, and this is what gets our customers in trouble all the time, is when an inspector comes in and they see a valve, for example, that has a body that says China on the body, because that body itself was made in China and brought to the United States, but then the valve was assembled and tested in the United States. And so just because something may be marked with a country, you really need the paperwork behind it that shows the real country of origin. And without that paperwork, it's really easy to get in trouble on job sites.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, even if it's marked, you have to have the paperwork to verify it.
It should support it.
Okay. Okay.
And if anyone has a question, we have folks inside that understand this better than I do. And once we know the specific statute you're talking about, we can tell you which one of our products does or does not meet it with more certainty than I can in a general conversation.
It only takes 3 lawyers of reviewing it before
they'll. See now I feel like really bad for all my purchasing agents when I was like reading contracts and I'd go through those clauses. I'm like, yeah, whatever, no big deal. Right? Yeah, it is a big deal. It's not quite so simple. All right, so Koltin, so fast forward 12 months. What do you envision in our industry in regard to Buy America or Buy American clauses and requirements?
I don't think the clauses and the requirements will change per se. I do think that there will be more jobs that have the requirement built into them. We're seeing private funding dry up on a lot of jobs. Our customers are as well, obviously. And we're seeing a lot of government funding come through on jobs. And with that government funding usually comes a tie to some sort of a Buy America or Buy American clause. Even if that funding is in a form of financing, you know, that as well, a lot of times has a clause associated with it if it's coming from the federal government. So as we get more into, you know, the federal government getting involved or state and local governments getting involved in projects, I think that you'll see more requirements for Buy America and Buy American.
Okay, that does make sense. All right, last question. I'm going to ask it to both of you. Rick, I'll ask you first. So any final advice for our contractors about Buy America, Buy American during this crazy, chaotic time?
I would say get as much information as possible about the specific statute that you are required to meet, and communicate with us directly or through our distribution partners, and we'll do the best we can to help you.
All right, Koltin?
I'm going to just reiterate what Rick said and be a good partner, but it's just communication. And I think that's the best thing that any of us can do during this time. It's challenging for everybody right now with deliveries on job sites, changing the way that we do those with contactless delivery and not being able to meet in person during pre-con meetings and everything else. So more communication is always going to be better, and together we'll find ways to move the industry forward and make sure that we're all complying and staying on the same page. Great.
All right, well, I don't have any other questions, and I have learned so much in this last 25, 27 minutes. Thank you guys so much for being here. And I know all of our members really appreciate the really great information. With that, Robin, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, yes, Rick and Koltin, so much for participating in this. It obviously is an important topic. We've had a huge turnout on this call, so it's been really great. I wish you all a very happy and safe 4th of July. And just a couple of things coming up. Next week's Quick Connections on July 8th, I just got confirmation that we will be having a person from the University of Washington, an epidemiologist, talking about vaccines and testing and things for COVID. So that should be a very interesting session. We also have Toastmasters coming up on July 22nd at 2 p.m. Anybody is welcome to attend that. And otherwise, again, have a very happy and safe 4th of July. Wish you all the best. Take care.
Thank you for having us.